go.
Can I say about psychological safety? That's what we're talking about, isn't it?
Yeah.
This is the one that annoys me the most. I find it so boring, right? So I'm keen to get your views on it. I think it's the most overused, under or misunderstood term that I hear thrown about, flung around all the time around we create psychological safety. Psychological safety is really important to us. Our people need to be psychologically safe to be themselves. I think it is such a struggle to achieve that, rather than just talk about it, because I think, well, my take is that it's all about being able to take risks, so to be vulnerable, to fail, to get it wrong. But also in corporate speak, we all, there's this whole sheeple bit, isn't it? That we are a corporate homogenous group. And so even from a human behavior perspective, somebody who's different or somebody, who steps out of that can be seen as a black sheep or a troublemaker or a complainer or a moaner, and they're not focused on, you know what I mean? So there's this balance of how can you be safe to be yourself, to have an opinion, to be secure enough to challenge maybe a direction that the organization's going, or a decision that a leader's made, or whatever. And for me, it's about emotional range, emotional intelligence. We grow physically in age, but our emotional development can stop along that journey. And for leaders to have enough of an emotional range to understand themselves before they can provide psychological safety for others can be quite tricky. So I know that's a bit controversial and a bit grumpy, but that's sort of my opening gambit to get a take from you folks on this overused take on it.
Yeah, I agree, but I think the same thing can be said for values. I think the same thing can probably be said in a lot of ways about inclusion as well. People like to use these buzzwords, but it doesn't mean they really understand them. And certainly from my experience, they use these sorts of words to attract people, but the underlying issues are still there, and they don't really know what it means, so they don't know how to implement it or where to begin.
So then it's really important, isn't it, to give some definition and clarity around what these terms actually mean to each and every individual in that organisation. And when it comes to psychological safety, for me, it's about showing up exactly as you are as a human being, bringing that self to the workplace. And a part of that self, it's your emotional experience at any given time. And as you're saying, leaders have to be the people to model this, to show people that it's safe to show up, to be vulnerable. I think it's about reframing vulnerability as a bit of an attribute too, rather than a weakness, right? What do you guys think about that?
I agree with what people are saying, because I think these terms have come out of disciplines that have taken decades to develop, like the counselling sector, like the therapeutic sector. Psychology is a very new social science. I mean, psychology is really only about 100 years old, based on the master founders like Jung and Skinner and Freud and all of the people that founded psychological templates. So the practice of psychological safety has happened within these sectors, including coaching and leadership development and executive coaching, because what we do one-to-one is we cultivate a sense of safety so people can open up and be honest with us. Now, what we're talking about is how do you take away all of that experience, all that historical origination of all of that understanding to put into practice, and ask everyday people who are strained under commercial and operational pressures to start cultivating an environment which is anywhere near resembles what has taken 200 years and a huge amount of clinical practice, coaching practice, to actually do that. So as a group, I think what we're trying to do is make it real. What are we asking people to do? How difficult is that? And how can we help them start to understand the stepping stones to move towards that in a realistic way? you know, because unless we understand that those terms have come from a massive amount of experience, you're talking about hundreds, thousands of hours of practice, which has then gone into research and is then developed conceptual frameworks to talk about the psychological and emotional landscape of our social experiences in life and work, and then expect everyday practitioners that might have gone into work as technologists, as people making yogurts, farmers, you know, these people are not necessarily have the language or the constructs to even relate to what these terms mean. So, you know, we've got to find a way of making you know, communicating the relevance of these terms in ordinary everyday language. You know, that's my sense of it.
And a part of that is just showing up as you are and expressing yourself as you feel, right? And a part of that, it's taking away any stigma from so-called negative emotions, you know, anger, sadness, fear, all of these things. We cannot be afraid of feeling these things, nor should leaders punish us for feeling these things. How do we do that? How do we destigmatize so-called negative emotion? What happens when people do present with these kind of emotions? How do we deal with that? What have you seen? What have you all seen in the workplace when people come feeling less than fabulous? When people are afraid to really speak up, when they disagree, like what have you seen happen in those instances?
Yeah, thanks, Lisa. I mean, I feel one of the important things is when we say leaders need to, this is not about leaders on its own. This is about everybody being educated, you know, because I think leaders also can feel oppressed because they don't feel safe. That, you know, we can't expect them to practice and learn, which is what Ed was saying, to become better at taking risks around being honest, or because the potential impact on their careers, the potential public impact on their reputation, if they get, say, try to be more honest in a situation and get it wrong, you know, they can lose, you know, the whole handle on the whole direction of an organization, because suddenly that becomes public information. So we've got to understand that this is something that can bridge the gap between leaders and the grassroots, between HR and middle management, you know, because it's something we all suffer from. We're frightened to learn the skills that could help us to create psychological safety for everyone at every level of responsibility and engagement within the organization. That's my view.
I agree. I think that, you know, when we look at those definitions of what it means to be psychologically safe, that, to Lisa's point, that role modeling bit for me is critical, because, you know, I can't sort of express the difference it makes to the sort of culture of a meeting or a team. You know, sometimes when I've been really taken aback when I've seen a really senior leader come in and just say, oh God, what a nightmare, you know, and then share something personal that's going on, you know, oh, I've got this going on at home, you know, or this has happened and it's, you know, I'm struggling with this or whatever. And just that moment, that signal, that sort of, you know, that symbol that actually you can be authentically you can talk freely, is that the way into that, you know, because then you do, you know, it doesn't have to become a therapy session as we've talked about before, but actually what's interesting is, do you see what I did there? That's my internalized corporate anti-woolly bullshit filter, where I have to make senior leaders or people feel safe in saying it's not therapy. I'm not suggesting it's therapy. And I did it there without even thinking, because actually it is really difficult for many people to talk about their feelings. And how they are actually feeling is so difficult that it's a trigger. You know, suicide rates amongst men are obviously you know, incredibly high, far too high, and we have got an issue around the ability to communicate our feelings, our true thoughts, you know, our perception of, you know, how we sort of hold on and how we present. And that is magnified, I think, in corporate environments. And so we're not seeing the role modeling of good emotional intelligence, good, you know, emotional development. You know, and it's interesting, you know, it's only sort of listening to you and having this chat, I'm thinking, you know, you can't be a psychologist or a psychiatrist unless you're in therapy. And I love that piece, because it's saying before you can do for others, you've got to make sure you're okay, because this is a very critical role that you're playing. It's people's development. It's getting into issues that affect their personal life. It's issues that, you know, affects their ability to earn and make money and sustain a lifestyle. And actually, we don't take seriously enough, in my opinion, the responsibility of leading and being responsible for people about where we are in that journey. Are we emotionally and psychologically safer in the home environments? Can we create it in our home environment? If we can't do it for ourselves, how are we going to do it for teams and people that we're being paid to look after? And, you know, there's a question there that maybe we should be in continual professional development slash, you know, therapy to make sure that we're okay before we sort of have that responsibility of looking after other people. Now that's a bit extreme, but you get my point, which is, are you all right? Can you do this? Can you show up? You know, are you in control of your own emotional development? Because guess what? If you're not able to communicate and talk about how you are in a way that allows people to be authentically themselves and do it, shock horror, you're not going to role model, let alone create this psychological safety. And the other quick thing I'll say on that is, we have so many different people responsible for psychological safety in a business, don't we? So you've got your people manager, so you've got your direct line manager, then you've got HR and the well-being agenda and psychologically safe and all of those sorts of things. Then you've got sort of up into that you know, that cultural piece about how we do business and are we psychologically safe and, you know, I actually just don't think it's a nuanced enough conversation to get it practically delivered.
Wow, you've just defined the new department that every organisation needs, the psychologically safe department. Yeah. And within that, you've got the cultural champion, you've got the MD's got to be in there at certain times, and that is a conversation that needs to connect in with all of these different roles. Because the common ground is, let's support each other within those pivotal positions around where we're at in our own emotional development, and let's develop some language within the context of creating a culture of psychological safety around the people who are responsible for doing that anyway. But if those people aren't supported, and if those people haven't got a language that they can actually relate to each other to build that cultural sense of identity and understanding of how they can help each other to create that cultural psychological safety, then everybody's isolated. You know, everybody's separate. Whereas if you look at finance, the finance department has got junior accountant, senior accountant, other people in there. They know they are the finance department. Then you've got the marketing department, or you've got, you know, people have allies within their area of expertise. What we need is a cultural department that actually explores who is responsible for creating that. And that can't be one person. It can't be the leader. It can't be the MD, can't be the founder. It's got to be people in different pivotal positions within an organization. And a small business, you could say that a small business from 2 to 25 people, everybody is in that cultural key thing, because it's small enough that everybody's emotional feelings and what's going on in their lives will impact on that culture, that group of people.
And I agree that everybody will impact, yet there is a piece of research from psychology which shows this thing called emotional contagion, whereby the person with the most perceived power in a group, it is their emotions that will really affect, that will really, you know, be passed on to everybody else. So I think it is particularly important that the people who have the perceived power here are the ones who are particularly aware of the emotions that they're expressing or not expressing to other humans, because again, they are setting the climate, they are creating the climate here. So I do think it's especially important that these people do the work first. But of course, everybody else plays their part too, without doubt. And we're looking at both creating positive, cultivating the positive, but holding a space for the negative too. Now, when I speak about the positive, we're not creating cultures of toxic positivity, because I know from work that Ed and I have done in the past, there have been cultures of toxic positivity whereby people feel really quite afraid to share their own emotional truths when there's any negative attached to that, you know, and the positive attitude has been rewarded when sometimes that wasn't the right thing to reward, where sometimes it would have been better to reward the people who actually came with a challenging question to the person in power. Have you seen that in action? Have you all seen that in action, and what happens as a result of that?
Well, I think to Carlos's point there about, you know, there needs to be somebody responsible for culture. That's quite interesting, I guess, from the HR circle, because what tends to happen is, you know, we've seen this shift as HR have gone for whatever they were called in the past to become HR and human resources. And we're now seeing a big shift towards them becoming people and culture. And I think from my perspective, all that does is say, well, now it's HR's problem, let them deal with it. Whereas it needs to be an organizational issue, and it needs to come from the senior leadership. So as much as you can put people in place, if you don't listen to their input and don't value their input and just see them as another overhead or an admin function, you're never going to get anywhere.
And to your point earlier, Sherry, that whole bit about inclusion, diversity, you know, another token thing, we have created a dumping ground in HR for go solve this people shit. Oh, is this people-y? You're people-y, aren't you? Could you just go and fix? And so culture, well-being, inclusion, psychological safety, all of these things get dumped in HR. And in that classic sort of lean Six Sigma piece where, you know, how far do you have to push something into the business before the business pulls it from you? We have this disconnect between the business sort of operationally pulling those bits in. And I love that, Lisa, about emotional contagion, emotions, feelings, so much is contagious throughout the business, even to how we speak to each other, how we dress, that proximity to power is mirrored and replicated and copied, because just as a human function, we see that as the route to power, the influencer, the important people, the more money, the career progression, whatever it is, we as humans gravitate to those positions of power. And so to do that, I see in my work a lot of ladder pulling up, especially say in a queer context, right? So we're LGBT friendly. And then I say, well, what do you mean? And actually what they mean is white cis gay men and white cis lesbians. They are the most appropriate corporate version of non-activist, non-screaming, non-overly challenging to any boundaries. They fit a corporate mold in the most acceptable space. And what happens is we get those LGBT folks pulling that ladder up because they don't want to be perceived in any negative way, by people with influence and power. And so they conform, and we see it in race, we see it in, all of the different characteristics where sometimes those ladders get pulled up to create an acceptable view of what it takes to be in this corporate environment. Now, you would challenge how you achieve psychological safety in those spaces, because for me, I deal with things like internalized homophobia, so my perception of their perception of the acceptable face of my sexual orientation has an impact on how I can show up in a workspace. And we all have those, whatever our things are. And that to me leads back to this piece about how many leaders, how many managers have we found that are just not the people that would be our 2 a.m. phone call? And that actually, I suspect they don't have any mates in their private life that they're their 2 a.m. phone call. And yet they're responsible for the working lives of people, where they are setting the tone, they're setting that culture, they're setting all those sorts of things. And so for me, it absolutely speaks to that emotional contagion, role modeled at the top. You've got a response. Leadership is a privilege, not a right. and how much development are you putting into it yourself, to put yourself in a place where you've got the emotional development to actually do it. And then here's the question that they talk about how many psychopaths make it to the top of industries because of the characteristics it takes to get there. And then we say, do organizations really have psychological safety, and is that role model from the top? Now, I'm not saying all the C-suite and CEOs I deal with for my clients start counseling saying, you know, did you just call me a psychopath? But there's a disconnect between what it takes, or what it took in our generations, let's say, to get up the greasy pole to get into senior positions versus what the generational expectations of people today are when we do talk about these things, so that they don't become faddy well-being, inclusion, psychological safety that HR create a poster on, you know? So that's that then.
I saw an interesting post this morning on LinkedIn. I can't remember the full details, but it was around bullying again, and workplace bullying, and the highest targets for bullying are the people that are the ones that are more likely to speak up, the people that care the most, the people that are the least selfish, and how that also links to a lot of the common traits amongst autistic people, or people with autism. And I thought, you know, that really sort of sat with me, thinking again, it just comes down to, the people in society that want to do the best are the biggest targets for people who are simply insecure, but who have pushed their way through that insecurity and become, I guess, transactional yes people to climb that ladder, because everyone thinks, even from when we're young, when we go to school, that our purpose is to pass tests, and is to say yes, and is to behave, and is to wear a uniform and do as we're told. So there's a huge challenge for workplaces, because it's not just about creating a safe environment, it's about undoing all of the unsafe actions that people have experienced previously as well. You know, your childhood, your parents, everything that you've experienced is going to impact who you are. And that's why I think, for me, psychological safety is having someone at the top that is open to being a bit vulnerable, that's open to being who they are, that's open to saying, you know, I'm having a bad day, you know, like the example that you used earlier, Ed, and just letting people have those conversations, having a laugh in the office, you know, not penalizing people for just wanting to have a little bit of a chat and a little bit of downtime. There's so much that can be done, and I think it's actually quite simple if you have the right people in the right places in the first place, and that's the challenge.
This is it. And it comes back to the fact, doesn't it? Everything that we've been talking about up to this point, I think it comes back to the fact that humans have these two needs. You know, on the one hand, we need to belong. We're creatures of a pack. We need to belong. On the other hand, you know, we need to be celebrated for our unique individual contribution. So what is it that we can do very simply to help everybody feel that they fit in, they play a part in the culture, but at the same time, you know, they're bringing something a little bit different to the table that's unique and individual to them. So it's how we can reconcile those two needs so that people have those very basic human needs met. I guess that's the question, isn't it? And in order to have those two needs met, people need to feel safe. So I guess the question here is, what can we do to help people feel safe at work?
Yeah, I think that's great, Lisa. And listening to what all of you were saying, I couldn't help this kind of idea. There's a paradigm shift, or a need for a paradigm shift. I mean, there's definitely society and the world is changing. I mean, a lot of these where we're failing is becoming more and more obvious as a society, as a global community, because you only got to look around. You call that a successful community? Well, you know, we still got wars, we still got all the stuff that upsets people, both on a private level and on a public level, is taking up a lot of worry and concern, and, you know, and then bring the environmental challenge of the very, very home that we live on is in jeopardy. I mean, it's like, that is the conscious reality, right? So something here we're doing is fundamentally wrong. And when we were talking before about leaders and, you know, and everybody climbing and all of those sorts of things, It's the pressure, I think, that has been driven around profit and making money for shareholders, and all of that means that there isn't the time to do the things that we're talking about at an authentic level. Because if you go and have a coffee for 10 minutes and you really engage around something meaningful with someone, that's 10 minutes that you've built an authentic relationship, maybe express some authentic feelings, but it's 10 minutes out of driving the commercial agenda of that organization, and then the leaders are accountable to their stakeholders and their shareholders, and all of that is a trickle down pressure. What you were saying before about the emotional contagion, right? Well, the biggest emotional contagion is we need to make money, otherwise we go bankrupt. You know, we need to pay salaries, we need to get this stuff delivered, or our reputation goes down the can and nobody wants to use us. We're gone. Right, so it's almost like the death of our organization that sustains us is the fear that drives everything, right? So if everybody's terrified of losing income, losing the commercial foundation of of what they're doing, then that is the emotional DNA of most people's experience of work, right? They go in and they shift into that, oh my God, am I going to lose my job? It's unconscious, but it's there. Now, this shift, I think, that's starting to emerge, which can't be a woolly concept, is this shift into authentic purpose. That unless we can have a conversation of why are we doing what we're doing, and this is what's beautiful about our engagement, we all know that we're doing what we're doing because of the very conversations we're having today, because something's fundamentally wrong with our own personal experience of work, what we've gone through. And it's brought up compassion, insight, and empathy towards people of our species, of our own human race. That's like, well, if I've gone through it and I really know it, and other people are in that, oh my God, that explains a whole load of problems. So our purpose is to open up that subject, and we're not saying it's a simple solution, but at least let's start airing how we feel about that and start to actually define and crystallize our purpose in MOCHA to provide an arena where we can really start to grapple with this as a real big social challenge that we have. And it is purpose within an organization that is going to give a different, if you like, emotional virus for people to actually catch as a form of contagion. Even the cats come in when we've been talking about this.
Really?
It's so purpose, I think, is an emotional connection with someone. I feel that we all feel connected to something important. And it brings us together. It motivates us to talk to each other, to build our relationships. And it motivates us to get what we're saying out into the world. And I think everybody has to have a version of that to make it worthwhile opening up, because if something isn't working, it's not just it's affecting my salary and my career progression, it's affecting our ability as an organization or as a company to make the impact in the world that we genuinely care about. And that's the problem. I think a lot of people are working in situations that they don't genuinely care about what they're doing because they can't link it with the real issues that we all need to be involved in making an impact on. Purpose needs to be a driving force, and we need to crystallize what exactly that is for ourselves and for our organizations. Otherwise, we're staying in the old financial paradigm, which is failing. It's not working. We need to look for something that's going to be more regenerative, for our own sustenance and sustainability on this planet.
Yeah, there's tons in there that I absolutely agree with. Sorry, I had to answer the door to a delivery in the middle of it all. # real life, isn't it? But for me, what we do about it is, I know I labored the point, but whether, when you want success in life, it starts with yourself, and not just financial success, to your point, Carlos, but, emotional fulfillment. We will be dead one day. So what did the legacy look like? What did the ride look like? What was that journey? And success to me comes from all, from that in its sort of entirety. And the question that I would like people who haven't chosen to have sort of a single entrepreneurial career, for example, if you are dealing with other human beings and their ability to perform well is reliant in any way on your ability to lead them, you gotta start, as in life, with you, are you able to maintain long-term relationships? Do you have long-term relationships in your life? Do you struggle with maintaining and, you know, all the hard graft that it takes to go into friendships? Friendships, like any other relationship, for example, take nurture. They take good times, they take bad times. Do you bin off loads of folks? Is your default position to just bin off and move on, or do you invest in maintaining things that are good, that are right? Obviously bin off stuff that's bad for you, but you know what I mean? These hard questions about how do you perform, not financially, not in terms of KPIs or, you know, how much money you make or what your latest deal was, but as a human, do you have the ability to maintain relationships and to nurture the relationships? You know, family members, if is the people you don't speak to, you've never spoken to in 20 years, we had a falling out, You know, when you collectively put all of these aspects of your life together, obviously there's always good reasons for individual incidences, but cumulatively, is your ability to hold space with other human beings fleeting, transactionary, or is it that you've got to a stage where you can emotionally hold space there with other human beings? If not, for any type of success, that's your number one point of call is, do I need help with challenging my views, my thoughts on how I am, in maintaining the quality of relationships with the people in my life, and what metrics can I use to measure that and challenge myself? Because I see a lot of leaders see this as an add-on. You know, we deliver great numbers. We delivered great numbers last year. You know, this is just, nice to have, but it's an add-on. Well, you could have delivered bigger numbers. You could have had less people leave. You could have had lower onboarding costs. You could have had, higher morale. You could have had better engagement from a client perspective. You could have attracted candidates in a different way. The bottom line could have been more positively informed by the culture in the organization, and it isn't an add-on, and it isn't a nice to have. So for me, it's that fear of failing. What does failure look like in your life? Because that's what your role modeling failure looks like in your organization or in your team. Is it binary? You were supposed to hit that number, you didn't. Now we're going to do, a performance management piece, and it better look like this. And to Carlos's point, the consequences is you're likely to lose your job if you don't hit the number. Now, that's all fine, but in a broader context of talent management, you don't throw an Olympian out of the Olympics team when in their training and in their development on the road to the Olympics, they don't hit everything every time. And so what does that look like? What does that transparent feedback look like? That personal development look like? That broader dietary piece, environmental piece, home life? How are you getting that elite individual into that elite position? And if that's not your MO, and it's binary, you're shit, that's a reflection on me being shit, I can't maintain any form of relationship with you, you're out the door, we'll get somebody else in who can do it. You have that culture of fear permeating, in those spaces. So for me, transparent communication, trust to fail, what development looks like. You're not out on your hoop. Should you not perform in these areas? Are we doing good enough analysis on how to get you to where you need to be, and so on, is really how, in real terms, we take all that broad stuff we've talked about today and start to, give it a practical lens about what does that look like in the organization at that sort of shop floor piece. And also, do you see, if that's not you, we work in the city and it's all about the numbers, or fine. Don't blow sunshine up candidates' arses on your website about the fact you foster psychological safety and it's of an interest to you and it's linked to our values, because they'll come in and they'll find you at the helm or these teams in place, and they will be out the door. You know, either you'll exit them because they're not a cultural fit, or they will run to your competitor where they do find that. So, you know, it's a balance of nobody's holding a gun to your head, but own it. If you're not, if well-being isn't a priority to you, if creating psychological safety isn't a priority to you, if working on your own stuff, you know, the culture of management and development isn't something that you're focused on, I think the window where we could say a good game on a website versus the experience of your people, candidates, talent, clients is shifting so exponentially that you're going to get caught out on it anyway. So at least have some integrity to own where you are on that journey, which is also pretty harsh. But I opened with saying this subject can be frustrating. So, you know, role model that honesty.
That's so inspiring. I feel so fulfilled and filled up to actually feel the validation of not just what you were saying there, Ed, but what everybody's saying, because there's something about when we're all living in the same realization of what's wrong and what needs to change and what can change, suddenly you feel supported in what we're doing, and just feeling supported around the sentiment of the people that you work with is so psychologically healthy. You know, I come off these calls and I actually need to go and sit down and have a cup of tea and say my life grew today. It changed my optimism, my positivity. I feel I've found a tribe here that I really can relate to. And whenever they speak, they're speaking for me. And the more we speak, I feel we're speaking for lots of people that maybe don't have the articulation skills that you've got, Ed, and you know, that we've got in this forum. And I think a big part of our purpose is to speak these things out so other people can feel heard, because actually what we're feeling and what we're sensing is what actually tens of thousands of people are feeling. And this is why it's so important for us to do these, capture these videos, these conversations, and make sure people have access to them. In my view, it'd be wonderful if we could maybe just recap, each of us individually, as to what we've actually talked about today. And like you did, Ed, beautifully put it into, you know, what can people, what do you think we've been saying, and what can be done as a consequence of witnessing our conversation today? Can I hand that over to the group, and maybe I'll go last and see what's left to say?
Yeah, I mean, I think that all of that conversation just sort of really, I sat there thinking about all these experiences and things that I've been through my working life, and yeah, it's just there's that whole piece where you come into the workplace and you've got all this wonderful excitement and ambition and you want to progress and grow, and you're naively positive about what that might look like. And you know, perhaps not everyone goes through the challenges. Some people might be very, very fortunate. Some people might just simply be results driven, and things work for them and they say yes and they get promoted, and life is lovely. But for people who have empathy, for people who have compassion, who want to go into leadership roles for the people element of it, it is a massive challenge. And they do just use buzzwords. And I'm so tired of seeing companies who use values for marketing purposes. And like Ed said, you know, you bring in people in, but what's the point? Because they're not going to stick around. And it's then going to cost you in replacement recruitment costs and replacement onboarding costs and getting people trained and developed. And it all takes such a long time. But the disconnect is in massive corporate businesses, because you've got these people at the top going, oh, you know, psychological safety is a thing, we need to add that into our website. But you've got the managers who are really dealing with the people issues, who have no real power or control over what they're doing. And I guess it's those people that we're trying to talk to and say, you know, we're here, we get this, we understand, we've got past these barriers ourselves in our own ways, and we are just here to listen, and for you to come into our circle and talk to us and be able to be you and be comfortable with that, and we will try and work with you on being able to express that externally as well.
Awesome. Thank you, Sherry.
Yeah, I love what we've all shared today. I think if there's one summary or one takeaway point that I'd like to offer, it would be that human beings have this fundamental need to have their voice heard. It's this thing from psychology that whatever you repress will always grow stronger in your life and will control you. So by having a space where you can express your own emotional truth, you know, when you put words to something, you free yourself of it and from it. You start to make sense of it so you can find a solution to it. You can move on in some way. It's really hard for people when they have to repress that which they're really thinking and feeling. So if there's one thing that I'd really like to highlight today, it's how important it is for each and every human voice to be heard at all times. And again, you know, by just being heard, a person is much more likely to be able to move forwards. But whatever a person is having to repress and contain will be controlling them and will be affecting them. You know, when you suppress your emotional truth, you are suppressing your immune system at the very same time. So from an emotional, psychological, and even physical standpoint, if you want your workforce to be healthy, let them share their voice. That would be the thing that I would offer as a takeaway.
Yeah, that was beautiful, Lisa. My final sort of sense of what we're saying here is that leaders do indeed need to take a look at to what extent they're capable of, you know, supporting their own growth, and in their own lives, with their friendships, with their family, and whatever, and to really take a look at how good they are at those building those long-term relationships, if they're going to take seriously, if you like, a human role of leadership, where they're connecting people, supporting people, and facilitating good teamwork and good relationships. I totally agree with that. I think what we're saying, though, is that also leaders are just another human being. And I think that what we're doing here is within MOCHA is saying that if we can create a space for those people to be validated, that no, it's not easy, as Sherry said, to be a people leader. Leadership, when I went into it as a field, I thought it was all about people. I thought it came from, you know, Christianity maybe, or it came from the idea of treat your fellow human beings well, and the journey to learn to do that well. And what I found was it wasn't. Being a leader was good at numbers, or good at delivering authority, or good at being operational in a certain, you know, whereas for me, leadership, as we're saying here, is about, you know, if someone's following you, then you can't be a leader if you haven't got people around you. You know, you're dependent on people. Otherwise, what's that identity mean? Who are you leading? And I think what we're saying, and what Ed was really focusing on, you've got to be able to lead yourself first. And you've got to know what that means to lead yourself. And if you can't lead yourself in creating better relationships and a better relationship with yourself, then how can you do that with other people? And we're just saying here, I think it's okay to fail as leaders who want to be better people leaders, because the conditions aren't right in mainstream work for those leaders to make mistakes and flourish and evaluate where they are on that journey. And what we want to provide is a safe psychological space for our audience, the people we want to support, to come and talk to us. So whatever they learn with us, they can then transfer that in to the people that they're responsible for supporting and leading. And we're not saying putting all the burden on them like we might put the burden on HR. We're saying your needs aren't met. The current leadership that really want to be people leaders, their needs are not met in mainstream working culture. They're not. And we want to provide the space here where we can start to validate their needs and support them in growing into more emotionally intelligent leaders, capable of being vulnerable and connecting with their teams.
Love it. I think we've spoken about psychological safety in the round there from multiple angles. It'd be good to hear from others in the community and keep that conversation going, really. So I'd be really interested to hear about, you know, people's experiences with psychological safety, good, bad, and ugly, so that we can continue that conversation about how to practically apply it. Beautiful. Thanks, folks.
Thanks very much indeed.
Thank you.
Speak again
Bye.
soon. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.